we're always on the lookout for those moments.
Yeah.
You know, those pivotal moments where you can really sense that things are shifting in a big way.
Yeah.
And well, right now, Bangladesh is definitely giving off those vibes.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, they're heading towards elections, but there's this whole other layer, a really fascinating new element in the mix. A Gen Z uprising that's really kind of thrown a wrench into the typical political dynamics over
Well, it's
there.
definitely shaken things up.
It has, and that's exactly what we're going to be diving into today.
Yeah, let's get into it.
We've got a fantastic NPR report to guide us.
It's a great piece.
It really does a great job of sort of illuminating what's happening on the ground over there. And it really focuses on how young people, you know, spearheaded by these really dynamic student activists, have really gone from protest to potentially becoming a major force in shaping the political future of Bangladesh.
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. So our mission today, you know, in this deep dive is to really understand the significance of this development.
Yeah.
Especially the role that these young activists are playing.
I think a good place to start might be with just acknowledging how striking the phrase Gen Z uprising is.
It is.
You know, when you first hear that, it really catches your attention.
It does.
But, you know, this NTR article, it lays out some pretty significant events that happened last summer.
Yeah.
Can you maybe sort of like set the scene for us, what actually happened?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, last summer saw this huge surge of protests across Bangladesh.
Huge, yeah.
And right at the forefront were these student activists.
Front and center.
Yeah, and the article makes it clear, you know, that their primary aim was really to bring down Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her government.
Right.
And one of the key figures that emerges in this whole story is a 26-year-old student activist named Nahid Islam.
Okay, so things escalate to the point where Prime Minister Hasina, she actually reportedly flees to India.
That's right.
That's a pretty significant moment.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge crisis point, isn't it?
It is. And you know, it really brings home the severity of what's happening over there.
Right. And it's, you know, the article, it makes it clear that, you know, there was a very serious human cost associated with these events.
Of course, yeah.
The article reports, you know, around 1,400 deaths and a huge number of injuries as well.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
And you know, a lot of that is attributed to the actions of state security forces during the unrest.
Right.
So, you know, it's a really, you know, tragic consequence of all of this.
Yeah.
And you know, it's a reminder that these political shifts have real human consequences.
Absolutely.
So amidst all of this tragedy, you know, the NPR article shines a spotlight on figures like Nahid Islam.
Okay.
And his story is actually quite fascinating.
Tell me more.
So, you know, following this incredibly intense period, Nahid Islam, you know, his trajectory changes dramatically and really rapidly. Yeah, he goes from being this student activist to being involved in an interim government led by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus.
Wow.
And then he ends up taking on this role of convener for a brand new political party, the National Citizens Party, or NCP.
So from the streets to the halls of power, essentially.
That's right.
That's remarkable.
And the article really emphasizes, you know, Islam's perspective on why all of this was necessary.
Yeah, what's his take?
Well, he felt that this uprising, you know, this was the only real way to dislodge what he describes as a fundamentally corrupt system. And he believed that any attempt at negotiation, you know, would have just been futile.
So there was this deep sense of disillusionment then,
Yeah.
and this feeling that radical change was the only option.
Yeah, a real sense of urgency.
So they have this uprising, they create this new party, the NCP.
Right.
What's their vision? What kind of changes are they actually pushing for?
Well, they present themselves, you know, as a centrist party.
Yeah, okay.
They're aiming to offer a fresh perspective
Okay.
in what Islam calls a post-ideological era.
Okay.
And a really central part of their platform is this demand for a major overhaul of the current political system.
Wow.
And really substantial constitutional reforms.
So they're not messing around.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. And you know, Islam's argument is that the existing framework, you know, it actually makes authoritarianism possible.
Right.
And their goal is to put safeguards in place to prevent future governments from falling back into these patterns.
These problematic patterns that they're talking about, can you elaborate on those a bit?
Sure. Well, you know, the article points to these persistent accusations of corruption, oppression, human rights abuses, restrictions on freedom of speech.
These are serious allegations.
They are. And they've plagued Bangladesh under the leadership of the two dominant political forces,
Uh-huh.
the Awami League, which is currently led by Sheikh Hasina, and then the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, the BNP, which is led by Khalida Zia.
Okay, and to really understand all of this, I mean, we need to consider the historical context, right?
Right.
The NPR report does a good job of giving this kind of brief historical overview.
It does.
Starting with Bangladesh's independence in 1971,
Yeah.
and then the subsequent war, and then this period of one-party rule,
Right.
and then a military takeover that lasted until 1991.
Yeah, it's a history marked by, quite a lot of turbulence and, shifts in power.
Yeah, turbulent is a good word for it.
And the article also mentions, the influence of another party, the Jamaat-Islami Party,
Oh, right.
which has had a rather, let's say, volatile history.
Volatile? How so?
Well, it's been banned at times,
Mm.
and then the ban was recently lifted by the interim government.
So their status has been kind of up in the air.
It has, and that really, reflects this really intricate and often, contentious political dynamic that's going on over there.
Right.
Now, looking ahead, to the upcoming elections,
Yeah.
which are expected to take place in December or shortly thereafter. The forecasts from polls and from, media outlets,
Mm-hmm.
they're all suggesting that the BNP
Okay.
is likely to emerge as the dominant force.
So that makes the arrival of the NCP even more interesting.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it seems like they're stepping into this potential void
Okay.
that's been created by the exile or imprisonment of a number of Awami League leaders.
This is a risky move.
It is a real gamble.
It is, but, they've got this one significant factor that might work in their favor.
Oh, yeah. And what's that?
The demographics.
Okay.
The article points out that a huge chunk of the population in Bangladesh is young.
Right.
45.9 million individuals between the ages of 15 and 29.
Wow.
That's about a quarter of the entire population.
That's a sizable youth population.
It is, and it's a demographic that the NCP is very clearly trying to connect with.
They are. And the reported voter turnout in the 2024 elections, which was only around 40%, and potentially even lower, according to some analysts.
Really?
That suggests there's a real opportunity here for the NCP, to mobilize this younger segment of the electorate.
They might be able to tap into a pool of voters who have been disillusioned or disengaged.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And Islam himself, he seems to believe that this new generation, fueled by their own kind of distinct aspirations,
Okay.
is turning away from the established political order
Interesting.
and actively seeking change.
So this isn't just about winning over new voters.
Right.
This is about capitalizing on an existing sentiment of change.
Yeah. Yeah. And their manifesto.
Right. Their platform.
Yeah. Their platform really seems designed to resonate with this sentiment.
How so?
Well, they're prioritizing things like education, healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
climate change,
Yeah.
the specific needs of young people.
These are really key issues
They are.
that are important to young people all over the world.
They are.
So it makes sense that the NCP is trying to position themselves as the party that actually gets it.
Yeah. Yeah. The party that's actually listening to these concerns in a way that the older, more established parties haven't.
But the article doesn't just present a rosy picture.
No, it doesn't.
It also brings in the perspective of Naomi Hossein,
Sure.
who's a political analyst, and she raises some important points about the challenges that the NCP faces.
Yes, she does. What kind of obstacles are you talking about?
Well, one of the big ones, and it's a really fundamental challenge that a lot of new parties face, is actually translating votes into seats in parliament.
Yep.
Even in a fair and democratic election,
Mm-hmm.
the way constituencies are structured, the first past the post system,
Right.
it can make it really hard for new parties to gain a foothold.
So just to clarify for our listeners, what does first past the post actually mean?
Sure. So basically, the candidate who gets the most votes in a particular district wins that seat,
Okay.
even if they don't win a majority of the total votes cast.
Okay.
So you can imagine a situation where a party wins a bunch of districts by small margins, and they end up with a majority in parliament,
Right.
even though another party got more votes overall.
So it's not just about winning over voters. It's
Exactly.
about winning in the right places.
Yeah, and it's about understanding the nuances of the electoral system.
And on top of that, the article reminds us that a lot of young people in Bangladesh already have allegiances
Right.
to the student wings of the BNP and Jamaat.
Of course.
So the youth vote isn't this entirely untapped resource.
It's a much more complex landscape than that.
Right.
And, we hear from Muhammad Abu Bakr Siddiq Mullah, who's a spokesperson for Jamaat Islami.
Okay.
And he emphasizes the fact that their student organization, along with the BNP's student wing, they were also involved in the uprising.
Okay.
So they're saying, hey, we were part of this too.
Right.
And Mordella predicts that the Gen Z support in the elections is going to be split between these existing parties and the new NCP.
So it's not like this unified youth movement all rallying behind the NCP.
Exactly. And he even names some key figures within the student branches of Jamaat and BNP.
Really?
Yeah, so there are already established loyalties and organizational structures in place.
I see.
And then the article brings in another perspective from Abdul Moin Khan, who's a senior member of the BNP.
Okay.
And he offers a kind of different take on the idea of political reform.
What does he say?
Well, he emphasizes that reform is an ongoing process.
Okay.
Not something that just happens because there's a generational shift. He's saying that the real driver of change is new ideas.
Okay.
Not just a change in leadership based on age.
So he's pushing back a bit against this narrative of generational change.
He is, and it's an important point to consider.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
But even with all these challenges, Naomi Hussein, she points out that the NCP has gained a lot of popular support and public sympathy as a result of the uprising and the sacrifices made by these activists.
Right.
And that has to count for something.
It does. And Hussein is actually quite optimistic. She suggests that if the NCP does well in the election, if they can secure some initial wins, they could use that to build their movement over time.
Right.
Attract more support, build up their resources.
And become a more established force.
That's the hope anyway.
So it sounds like a long game for the NCP.
It does.
And when Nahid Islam was asked about the possibility of becoming prime minister, his response really seemed to align with this long-term vision.
What did he say?
Well, he emphasized the importance of collective leadership rather than focusing on individual ambition.
So not about him becoming the next big leader.
Right. He was really framing the uprising as just the beginning, the first phase of a much broader movement.
Interesting.
And it's also worth noting that NPR tried to get a comment from the Awami League.
Oh, really?
But they were unsuccessful, which maybe speaks volumes about the current political climate.
It might.
Yeah. So to kind of sum all of this up, what we're seeing in Bangladesh is the emergence of this new political force, the NCP.
Right.
And it's rooted in this really significant Gen Z uprising.
Led by student activists.
Exactly.
And this uprising has really shaken things up.
It has. It's led to some major events, like the reported departure of the Prime Minister.
Yeah. And the big questions now are, can this activism be turned into lasting political power?
Right.
And will the established order be able to maintain control?
It's a really complex situation.
It is, especially when you consider those existing loyalties among young people to the older parties.
Yeah, and the difficulties that new parties have in gaining representation in the electoral system.
Exactly.
So much to think about.
It really is. And it kind of brings us to this really thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Right.
Given everything we've talked about, the history of Bangladesh, the different perspectives on political change, some people talking about revolution, some people talking about reform and new ideas, what do you think are the most crucial factors that are going to determine the long-term impact of this student-led movement?
Yeah.
And what kind of new ideas could actually reshape the future of Bangladesh?
What a question to leave us on.
I know, right? It's a really exciting time to be watching Bangladesh.
It really is.
We'll have to see how it all unfolds.
Absolutely. We'll be keeping a close eye on it.
Until next time.
Thanks for joining us.